The University of California, Riverside presents Blue, Gold, and Black, the podcast that's dedicated to amplifying Black voices at UCR. I'm Dominique Beale from UCR's Community Engagement and Outreach Unit. In each episode, we'll be talking to UCR students, campus leaders, and community partners to explore the intersection of being Black and being a Highlander at UCR. And I can't wait for you to meet today's guest. Let's get started. What's up, everybody? I want to give a huge shout out to Toy, who is the Assistant Director of the LGBT Resource Center. The LGBT Resource Center sponsored today's episode, so make sure you guys check them out, show them some love, and let's get to our guest. What's good, everybody? Welcome back to Blue, Gold, and Black. My name is Dominique Beale. I am your host. Today, we have a super special guest. Dr. Jonathan Higgins is going to be joining us, and they're going to be talking to us about their life, their upbringing, and what they do as an educator, a writer, and a mental health advocate. Dr. Higgins, we're super excited to have you on. How are you doing today?
You know, I'm doing the best that I can with what I have. So that's basically the only way I can explain it.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think there's a lot of people that can kind of identify with that sentiment. And hopefully in today's interview, we can kind of unpack that a little bit more and talk to, students about how they can make sure that they're maintaining their mental health throughout these times. So thank you. Yeah, so totally. So thank you again. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. So really, can you just give us, the Cliff Note version of who Dr. Higgins is today? You're an educator, you're a writer, you're a mental health advocate. Just kind of talk to us a little bit about what that looks like for you today.
Yeah. I tell people that I am the one thing that I kind of center and I focus on in everything that I do is speaking truth to power. And what that means for me is centering truth on my lived experience, centering truth on the experiences that other individuals have and don't get to speak openly about. And then ultimately, too, inspiring people. I feel like my role or what I've been called to do is to inspire people to utilize whatever avenues they can to, creatively or, respectively, whether it be in writing, whether it be through education, whether it be through, music, whatever the case may be, figuring out a way to be able to speak their truth and be able to really just kind of find peace in the experiences that they have. I think for me, that's the number one thing. I know for me growing up, I didn't find a lot of peace in a lot of parts of my identity, right? If you follow me or if you know anything about my experience, I talk very openly about what it's like to be queer, what it's like to be Black and queer, what it's like to be Black from the lens of a queer community that's not extremely accepting. And so having all of those different identities have really kind of created this space for me to think about what does my life look like through the lens of a multitudes of different identities that are oftentimes not celebrated. And so I think that that's been the biggest thing for me in my work is figuring out how do I reclaim the narrative that is oftentimes not celebrated in our world, and how do I find peace and joy in that? Especially in a time and in a world where a lot of these identities oftentimes are not identities that are ultimately reveled in or seen as being quote unquote good, if that makes sense. So
no, yeah, thank you for sharing that, and I'm super excited to kind of unpack all of those various intersections, especially when we're talking about identity as a Black person, and then when you add in the layers of your queer identity on top of that as well, and everything else. It creates a lot of emotions in people for one reason or another. So talk to us a little bit about kind of like where you grew up and what were some of the childhood experiences that you had that were kind of really instrumental in starting to shape you, throughout your life.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I always like to tell people that I understand the Inland Empire as much as I understand Los Angeles / the Compton area. So I grew up at the intersections of both of those areas per se, right? My mother, when we were young, divorced from my father, we moved to the IE, lived very close to some of my family. I had family in Reno Valley, I had family in San Bernardino, I had family in Rialto. And so kind of growing up in the IE, like Monday through Friday, was a very interesting interesting experience because it wasn't, in growing up in the IE, Blackness wasn't something that we oftentimes spent a lot of time kind of entertaining. It was just kind of like, these are the rules, these are the things you need to know if you're going to be out with your friends. It was just the typical quintessential, my mom was a single Black mother raising 2 Black kids in the IE. It was just very much, I learned what it meant to be from the IE. One of the things that I think is really important to bring up, right, is about the idea of where I was not allowed to go, in certain aspects, right? So, I had friends that, because I went to San G when I was in high school, I had friends who lived in Redlands. I had friends who lived in Yucaipa. And so my mom was often very much anti me ever being out there too long. It was always like, you need to be home by 5, 6 o'clock. Because my mom saw those cities as being sundown towns. And for those who don't know what sundown towns are, it's basically a place where Black people shouldn't be caught after a certain time, right? After 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock when the sun goes down. So very much was not allowed to go anywhere past that part. But then on the weekends was interesting that my father, oftentimes my mom would try to take us to, interact with our family in Los Angeles. And so my grandmother lived in Compton. My grandfather lived in, he lived off of, I think it was like 128th and like Martin Luther King. It was in Compton, but it wasn't in Compton. It was I forget where the specific city was. I just remember it being a very Black area. Like whenever I would go visit my father's family or my mom's family, it was just a very Black area. And so there were a lot of things that we got to do as Black kids, on the weekends. We sang, we danced, we did we would run around, and it was a really fun time. And so it was very interesting because it was like, there were times where I would be out in Compton and it was like, yay for being Black. And then I would come back to the IE and it was like, I would have to kind of put that away. And for a very long time, it made it very difficult for me to really understand who I was because I didn't get the general kind of all Black all the time experience that some of my friends had. So when I got to college, it made my experience very kind of jarring because I was starting to experience, now that I know the terminology, I was experiencing anti-Blackness and I was experiencing racism and I was experiencing a lot of these different isms and phobias that I was not privy to because ultimately in the IE, I was not experiencing them as rapidly as some of my friends who were from like the LA area or from different parts of like Los Angeles County. So it was just a very interesting mindset and a different life to kind of live in, knowing that I kind of had moments where I needed to turn my Blackness on and then in times being told kind of, whether it be subtle or whether it be very direct to turn it off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so talk about kind of the element then, you mentioned like there was a lot of, fun within your home life and then kind of like out on the society aspect, like when you're out in the streets, when you're out hanging out with friends, you're kind of confronted with this different reality. Kind of tie that into your school experience as a child and how some of that was instrumental in the shaping of your developing identity at this point. Yeah.
So, I learned very on being a very, so I always say I was a very alert kid. And that's the word I think is best to describe me as a kid. And when I was growing up, I was often told that I was extremely talkative. That was the word I would always see on my report cards. Jonathan is talkative or he talks too much. And it was very much kind of this idea too, like even in my own family, being talkative as a young Black kid, that was seen as something that was feminine, was very like you should be seen and not heard as a little Black boy. And I saw that both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And so for years, I was very kind of in this, I lived in this place of being like, I was often being told I talked too much. Basically, that was what I was constantly told. From the time I was in, elementary to the time I got to middle school, about to the time I got to high school. When I got to high school, I kind of just learned that, okay, the world doesn't want to hear from me, so let me be quiet. So I kind of shifted and I became very, very quiet in high school. And, for a very long time, people were like, what's wrong with John? For years he was so talkative and now all of a sudden he doesn't talk at all. What's that about? And it was really just, I learned that not saying anything, because I knew from a very young age that I had a very feminine voice. And I still to this day get called ma'am and all these different things. I started to just learn very on that no matter where I was or what I was doing, I always kind of I kind of took on this idea that something was wrong with me. And I didn't really know what that was, but I just knew that whether it be from the way that I performed or the way that I talked or the way that I just took up space, like I started to learn that something was wrong with me and I didn't know what that meant. And so when I got to high school and I started kind of, dimming my light, I that's kind of what I talk about in my story. I started to dim my light in high school. I wasn't talking. I wasn't really, I wasn't singing anymore. I wasn't doing all of the things that a lot of the world, I thought, and I thought in my mind would have caused me more problems. When I got towards the end of high school, I started entertaining the idea of wanting to go to college because I had always kind of known, and I hate saying it this way because it comes across as being very pompous, but I knew I was smart. And I knew I had something to say. And I knew I knew that I had like a calling at a very young age that was extremely inspirational because people would always say, I love being around you. You're so fun. You're so great. You're so this and so that. But I was also being told from family that, I took up too much space. I was loud. I was this. So it was all conflicting. When I decided that I wanted to go to college, I started getting a lot of pushback from family and also from a lot of the people in my religion, because growing up, a big piece of my story, if you've seen my TED Talk, is that I grew up a Jehovah's Witness. And so growing up a Jehovah's Witness, education is not something that's encouraged. Being feminine is not something that's encouraged. The thought was if I was to go to college, I would meet people like me who would encourage me to leave the religion. And so that's exactly what happened. I got to college and I started seeing that there were other people who were going, you're really intelligent. You really have a lot of good things to say. Why are you not saying them? And so college, in a way, really inspired me to really just kind of come out of the shell of like, again, while I was not 110% understanding what was happening to me, because I went to Cal State San Bernardino, but I had a lot of friends who went to UCR. And so, my friends who went to UCR, they were also Black. We were sharing kind of the same experiences of like, why is it? Go ahead.
No, yeah, because I just kind of wanted to ask you to kind of expand a little bit on, so obviously you felt that you were smart, and so college seems like a logical step. Yeah. But I just wanted you to share if there was any other like early childhood influences of like, did you have family members that attended college or were affiliated with universities throughout the IE or anything like that kind of help maybe put that seed in your mind a little bit earlier than high school?
Yeah. So I will say that's the really cool part about my story is that my aunt is the one who kind of put that seed in my mind right around the time I got to high school, that college was within my reach. She went to UCR. And so I remember going with her, like, I mean, I was probably 7th or 8th grade, going with her to, pick up books at the library, or going with her to turn in assignments, or and so then, when I would spend the summer with them, because they lived in Reno Valley, my uncle put us in programs at UCR during the summer. There were a lot of like summer high school, like pre-high school programs that you could do. And that was initially what made me believe that maybe college is within my reach. But I think kind of circling back, I think there was still this struggle that I had of like, okay, you're not what the world is telling you to be. And yet you're wanting to aspire something to be more specifically within college. Going to college was a very scary thing for me because ultimately, like I've said in a lot of different places, my mom was like, I don't know what college is because I didn't go to college. So when you get there, you're on your own. And I think that was what really scared me about going to college was, what if something goes wrong and I don't have anybody to support me? What do I do? So, it was, when I started dumbing around, and like I've said before, I looked at different schools and I went to different places to think about, could I see myself here? Initially, I did land on Cal State San Bernardino with the notion that I was going to hopefully one day leave a legacy behind that would encourage other people who looked and lived like me to be able to be their full authentic selves.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to kind of ask that because I think context is so important in everything, that we do. And, one thing that I feel like I've been learning, it's not so much like what you do as far as how you title yourself, but it's who you are and what you bring into what you do that makes it that much more relevant, that much more impactful, that much more relatable. So I kind of want to talk about some of the coping mechanisms, right, that you had to kind of use. And you talk about dimming your light a little bit, throughout your childhood and navigating through high school. And even though I want you to kind of provide that context before you had that education in the language to use it, I think there's a lot of students that might feel the way that you feel. So, what were some ways that you tried to cope with the things that you were experiencing throughout high school? And were there people in your life during that time that did try to, shed some positivity over what you were experiencing that may have kind of helped combat, those negative feelings that you had?
Yeah. So I think a really interesting story that I kind of always tell is thinking about when I did get to Cal State San Bernardino. So I think this is very interesting for me to share because I think sometimes we don't talk about the road of how we get somewhere. So I had initially, when I was in my last year of college, I applied to 4 or 5 schools. I initially wanted to go, my dream school was going to university at Manoa in Hawaii. That was like my number one school. And initially what kept me from going there, I did get accepted there. I got accepted there. I got accepted to UCR. I got accepted to Cal State San Bernardino, Northridge, and Fullerton. Those are the 5 schools that I applied to. And I initially ended up accepting Cal State San Bernardino because one, it was, something I knew. I knew the streets of San Bernardino, so why not go there? But ultimately there was this cost. There was the cost thing. My mom very much was like, if you go to Hawaii and something goes down, I don't have the money to help you to get home or, to even keep you there. So, it got real scary for me because I was like, wow, this is a real thing. I don't have money like my friends to be able to just go away to school. So Cal State San Bernardino was like kind of my safe bet. When I got to Cal State San Bernardino, I still was met with this idea of, one, I knew I was different and I felt different. And even though I had friends who were like embracing my difference, I was struggling with embracing my difference.
Sure.
And so it made my first few years very kind of hard to deal with. And by the time I got to my second year at Cal State San Bernardino, I was doing a lot of different things. That was basically what I like to call the self-sabotaging model. My whole entire life, I kind of didn't really see my light. I didn't see it for me. I didn't see my light. I didn't understand it. So, when I got to my second year of college, it was kind of like, I'm here. I'm just kind of, doing what I got to do. And my grades were slipping because I was working, I was partying, I was doing everything that I probably should not have been doing when I was living on campus. And eventually, one of the stories, I always have to thank the person who genuinely helped save me in terms of my second year and continuing on. Carolyn A. Stevens, who now I think works at a HBCU back east. She was my I forget what the program was called. She ultimately was a mentor for me. She was basically the person I could go to. I'm struggling.
Is it EOP?
EOP, that's it. Thank you.
Yes.
She was my EOP counselor. And her being my EOP counselor was really cool because she basically became like a mom to me while I was at Cal State San Bernardino. She was this she had a very sternness about her, but it was very loving. And I remember, I'll tell the story and then I'll be quiet, but she ultimately, I remember one time not going to class, and I remember her coming down to my rest hall, knocking on my door and dragging me to class. Her saying, why are you not in class? And I was going, and she was like, get dressed. And she walked me over to my math class.
Wow.
And I'll always thank her for that because I think what it was when I ended up kind of debriefing that situation with her a couple of weeks later in one of our meetings, she ultimately said, I do not want, she basically said, I think you're bright. I think you are extremely intelligent, and I don't want you to ruin that. So she basically said, I'm going to do everything that I can to keep you here. And that's basically what she did. She helped me change my major. She helped me find a degree that worked for me. And ultimately, within a year, my GPA shot up from a 1.9 GPA to like a 3.2. And that was with all of her help. So I think it's imperative for me to say, I went into college not believing in myself. And because of the experiences that I had and finding people on campus who believed in me, I was able to unlock something in myself that was really special. And I like to encourage students to think about that. When you get to Cal State or when you get to UCR, wherever you go, you may feel like you aren't supposed to be there, but I can guarantee you that there are people who see you and understand you in your journey and are going to do everything that they can to help support you in it.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautifully said. And I think it's important for students to really kind of unpack that aspect of feeling like you might not belong, right? Mm-hmm. You've been working all throughout high school, maybe even junior high, to kind of get you to this point where you're at college. And yet, despite all of that hard work, you can get there, and whether it be lack of representation, not seeing yourself, not having this aspect of community, you can very quickly soon feel like you don't belong or that you aren't capable. And, you know, college is one of those unique places because it's one of the perfect places to unpack and understand your lived experience and how you can turn that lived experience into not only a career, but a beacon of hope and understanding for other people. I think about all of the resource centers that we have on UCR, in particular, our African Student Program Center and our LGBTQ Resource Center. And big shout out to Toy, because she was instrumental in bringing us together so that you and I can be having this conversation. Mm-hmm. And so let's kind of put a pin in this area where you, Miss Stevens, she was able to kind of get a hold of you, you know what I'm saying? Kind of get your head on straight. And so kind of let's talk about like what transformation starts taking place after that point. You're getting these resources, you're getting in a better headspace, you're doing better in class, you've changed your major. Start talking to us about, who Jonathan Higgins is transforming into at this point in their college career.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it was being a part, so we didn't have at Cal State at the time, we didn't have specific centers the way that a lot of schools have. I mean, obviously, this was early 2000s. And so the concepts of centers weren't around. However, there were still Black queer professionals who were around on campus that were basically like, I see you. And I appreciated it. I like to shout out all of the people who genuinely, Aaron Burgess, I think about Misty Livingston. I think about all of these individuals who ultimately they in some capacity, Toy, great example of someone who I am still very connected to. At the time, because we didn't have these centers, there were programs and services that they were working in or providing that basically was saying, I don't know why you're tucking yourself away. And so they were the ones that were encouraging me to stand up in classes and say, what you're teaching is problematic, or, I don't feel this to be true, and questioning my educators. And I'll be very transparent. I think it was very scary because, being from such a, it's so funny because San Bernardino is so interesting because it's such a big city, but yet at the same time, it's such a small city. Gotcha. And I think in terms of the way that it's framed, it's very small-minded, I should say. And so even thinking about how it's redlined and thinking about who holds the power at certain places, I was really scared at moments to, rub too many feathers together and end up, being kicked out of school. That was what I was fearful of like, if I, lose this opportunity at Cal State San Bernardino, where am I going to go? That was the number one question I had. But it was so cool to know that there were so many people there who had my back and who still have my back. And so I think about that a lot, coming into it. I think really what I want folks to take from this conversation, is to start thinking about the ways that the world has told you to tuck yourself away or to silence yourself. And we're all told to be quiet in certain ways, right? The different systems of privilege, the different systems of racism, sexism, all these different isms that live in the world are ultimately what tells us to be quiet. But then there are people who ultimately see things in you and they say, step that up a little bit. And I'm so thankful because I think I would not have been able to graduate from Cal State San Bernardino or to even go on to get a master's, because that was the big thing for me. I will say that. I think that's what I really want to note in this point. I didn't believe that I could do a master's degree. I didn't believe that I could even do a doctorate degree. And it was the people at Cal State San Bernardino in my experience, and I'll be very transparent too, there were some folks over at UCR as well who genuinely pulled me to the side and said, why are you not going for the gold, right? Like, why are you not going for more? You're so much more than what you're giving yourself credit for. So I think that that's the thing I really want folks to understand, is to think about, these systems that are put in place to keep you or to make you feel like you're less. That's the system working. What it really comes down to is finding people who see you and believe in you, and for you to really believe in yourself. And I know that's so cliche to say, but I tell people all of the time, you cannot become who you want to become if you don't believe in yourself enough to become it. And so I'm a living proof of, I did 4.5 years at Cal State San Bernardino. I did 1.5 years at Redlands in my master's. I did 2 years in my doctorate program. And ultimately, who I've become today is all a reflection of the people who believed in me in the last maybe 10 years of my academic, my academic career. So I think that's important. Find people who truly believe in you and ultimately will encourage you to find that belief within yourself.
So also, because that's a beautiful point, mentorship, allyship, sponsors, even, all of these various things that, you can utilize to kind of help you be successful, right? And, it's special because it always seems like those type of people come when they're supposed to come, right? It always seems like right when you're on the verge of expulsion, boom, an academic advisor snatches you up and is like, yo, like, what's going on? I know it's not about the schoolwork. What's really going on? But can you talk to our young folks, our students, the part that they have to play in that, right? Because it's a two-way street, right? The academic advisor, she could have came, knocked on your door, and you could have slammed the door right in her face,
Right,
So can you kind of shed some light on, why is it important for students to sometimes take that chip off their shoulder and accept the help and the opportunity when it's being presented to them? Because I think a lot of our students, Black students and Black and queer students especially, feel like they have to get it out of the mud or else it's not validated. And I want to break that barrier down. Can you speak to that a little bit?
You know what? I can. I think it's important to recognize. So the one thing I will say is this. I think in our culture, we are taught. So I'll say this and then I'll make my point. I used to be a very big proponent of telling people I'm resilient. I'm this, I'm that, because everything in the world, that has been thrown at me makes me who I am. And then over, the last few years, I've stopped using that word because I've recognized that resiliency is a word being used. Like, I shouldn't have to be resilient, right? Like society, and even in my education, like me overcoming the racism and the bias and all of the different pieces that live in education, I shouldn't have to overcome that. So I've stopped using the word resilient, but the word that I have been using a lot and thinking about my own experience is a word that, I think resourceful is the word that I think is extremely important for folks in this matter. And when I say resourceful, I think what it becomes is like, so for instance, with me, I always like to tell people, I feel like in my whole entire life that I was given, having a single parent Black mom, my father not being in the picture, all these different things. I had every single thing that you could name hit me at a very young age. And some people look at my story and they go, and you're still standing, you're still here, and you're still doing all of these great things. How? And I said it was because I was resourceful. I learned very on that it was okay for me to say, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to figure it out. I don't know or understand this, but I bet you I can find somebody who does. That became kind of the game, that I had to learn in my own lived experience. And I had to get okay with the fact that there were going to be moments that I needed help. That was one of the things that I've learned even now, right? And I'm 35, I have my own company and I'm doing all of these different things, and people look and they go, oh my gosh, you're so successful. And I go, a big part of my success is me sitting down some days and going, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how I'm going to get to where I want to go. So I need to ask somebody, and I'm very blessed to know some really great people who have helped open and crack open certain aspects of life for me. So that way I can continue in the walk that I'm on. But I think that's important. I think it's important to get away from this idea that you are the person that has to have all of the answers, and that if you don't have the answers, that makes you weak. Get away from that, because I really believe at the end of the day, I always like to say something that has stuck with me is what other people think about me is none of my business. And if someone thinks that you're weak because you're asking for help, let them think that you're weak. You're the one getting the help that you need. You're the one that's getting ready to go to where you need to go. So really getting out of this notion that saying, you don't have to be, quote unquote, the strong person. You don't have to be strong because you're Black. You don't have to be strong because you're a man. Like, get away from all of these societal concepts that are keeping you from your own greatness. And when you can genuinely say, I need some help, or I need support, or I need somebody in my corner, or I don't feel strong enough to complete this year of my academic career, can somebody get me some resources? Like, that's you ultimately being resourceful, and that's what makes you strong. That's what makes you a successful individual.
Thank you for that. Because again, and I struggled with that, in college, right? I was a great high school student. I got good grades, and then I got to college, and, personal life things started kind of getting out of whack, which affected my academics. But I always just said, like, I'll pull it together. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to pull myself up by the bootstraps, quote unquote, and really just get to it, and I'll work it out. And I very soon realized I just kept digging the hole deeper and deeper and deeper, and I was getting angrier and more frustrated with myself. And I finally had to take responsibility over the lack of support that I wasn't receiving, because it was my fault that I wasn't getting that support at the end of the day. So thank you for sharing that. One thing I want you to also kind of tie in, who you are now, as a writer, as an educator, as an inspirational figure. Talk to our students about how their lived experience is actually scholarly work. Because I know you incorporated a lot of that philosophy into, what you got your doctorate in, and kind of what you educate folks on now. Talk to students about how they can healthily and effectively turn their lived experience into scholarly work, and allow them to help use that as a way to be successful in their pursuit of higher education.
Yeah, so I think that's, it's so interesting for you to frame it that way, because I always have to remind myself, like, I always like to say education saved me, but the streets raised me, but education saved me. That was kind of one of the frameworks that I oftentimes think about, right? But I always like to tell people, I know it's all of this is so cliche, but it really is real. The whole idea of, like, don't forget where you came from. It's real easy for me, I think now, specifically now in a time where, my money looks a little bit different, and it's not much different, honey. But the fact that my money does look a little bit different than what it did a few years ago, it would be real easy for me to remiss, or for me to not include San Bernardino experiences in the work that I do. It'd be real easy for me to forget, to tell people, oh, I'm from LA, and, and to just kind of talk about me living in Compton, and that's it, right? It'd be real easy for me to just, but ultimately all of those experiences are what allotted me the smarts, or the continuity, or, for me to I had to bring in all of the experiences that I had to really help fuel this power and this passion that I had for education. But not only that, to be an advocate for other people who looked and lived like me. Yeah. I think that's what's so important. I think for me, right, knowing that I grew up in a town where my Blackness wasn't celebrated, to live in to be a part of a family where my queerness wasn't celebrated, to live in a world where my Black fat queerness was ultimately basically almost stolen from me. It gave me the energy to say, you know what, I'm going to do my dissertation on the experiences that queer men of color have in their first year of higher education, right? Like, that was ultimately what said, I'm going to push the envelope, and I'm going to pull in my own experiences to hopefully make sense of other people's experiences. And that's really what my work has become. My work has become helping other people to understand what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and basically validating the idea that it's not them. Because a lot of times people think, oh, it's me that's creating these problems. And I'm going, no, it's the system that created this problem, or it's racism, or it's, homophobia, or it's this, or it's that. And so I think that that's what's really important for me, right, is to remind people to be very mindful that there is so much that you can learn when you go back and you start kind of mining your own experiences. And to be very mindful of not letting the world make you feel like wherever you've come from is not worthy of being celebrated. I love the idea that I live in the IE. I love the idea that I am from the IE. It's in my Twitter bio. Like when people ask me, where are you from? San Bernardino. Like I'm very proud of that because there was so much that I learned from being here. And so I think that that's important to remind people that, please don't let society or this world take away your joy or I really want people to get to this place where they recognize that where they come from and what they've been through is not something that should be seen as a negative experience. There's so much good that can come from that, specifically if you learn how to use it in the right way.
Yeah. And I think that goes into, one of the, aside from being able to work through your own issues and your own traumas and place them properly into context and give them language, your ability now, though, to assist other folks who identify as you or share experiences, your ability to now assist them on the journey that you've been on for the past umpteen years, it increases exponentially. And ultimately, that's the goal, right? And that's why I said earlier, it's not so much about what you do, but it's who you are and what you bring into what you do that makes it so impactful. So, to wrap up, I have two more questions for you, but, we mentioned a little bit at, doing the best we can with what we have. And, when we kind of look at the social landscape, it can be very disheartening, right? As a Black people, right? And then once we get below that surface, when we look at, what our Black queer brothers and sisters are going through, right? It's very challenging. So if you could you please just talk about this aspect of Blackness and queerness coming together, and also, maybe shed some light on the stereotype of how, Black people are more homophobic than other groups of people, and kind of just this rhetoric that we hear about our people and our culture, and just talk to us about, one, how we can love ourselves a little bit better, and then two, unlearn some of that miseducation to make sure that we're loving all of our people better.
So I think that the misconception that Black people are more homophobic than other races is a very, very big lie. And I want to make sure that I make that very, very clear that I've received homophobia from white people. I've experienced homophobia from Black people, and it all feels the same. So it's not that it's different because it comes from Black people. So I want to make that very clear. I think what's really important to think about in these conversations when we start talking about, so even thinking about this idea of, what stereotypes look like, and Black people are more this than that, Black on Black crime. Like when we start really digging into all of that stuff, a lot of it is created as a way to basically kind of create division, or to start. It's basically what it all comes down to, is that a lot of it is fueled and really kind of rooted in anti-Blackness, and this idea that if I can make you believe something about your own people to help you separate yourself from them, then now I have somebody on my end that's rooted or more deeply rooted into white supremacy. So I just want to make that very clear, that it is a game that a lot of people like to play, and you have to be smart about, capturing it. What I've learned about loving myself as a Black queer person in my full self is this, I always like to tell people that what it really comes down to is that every time you, in any fashion, right, whether it be on campus, whether it be off campus, whether it be at your job or whatever the case may be, the thought of you loving yourself in your fullness is an act of it really is a political act. And I want folks to understand that, because I think what folks don't seem to understand, that every time and so this is something I had to learn. I didn't learn this until after I got my doctorate.
Sure.
When you wake up and you put on your clothes and you go to campus and you sit in that class and you get that information and you take that information back to people who need it, because that's what I think people get mixed up on. People think, oh, well, because it's scholarly, it has to stay in academia. No, it doesn't. A lot of my work that I do is outside of academia. And I do that intentionally because I want other Black queer kids who don't feel like they have the support to go to college to know that there are people like myself out there who support them. That's an act of resistance. MLK did it. Audre Lorde did it. Like, there are all these individuals, James Baldwin, all of these great individuals from our past who utilized the knowledge that they had and got it back to the people.
Yes.
When you continue to do that, when you continue to walk in your full authenticity, you are ultimately reclaiming something that a lot of the world and society has tried to take away from you. When I wake up and I go outside, I always like to say I'm 3 things that the world ultimately hates: Black, queer, and fat. And all 3 of those things are in some way, shape, or form things that the world cannot stand. And when I take up space, and when I require people to call me Dr. Higgins, when I tell people that I own my own business and that nothing you can say on social media is going to get me fired because I work for myself, that's ultimately political, right?
Yes.
You ultimately own an element of yourself. No one can ever take away your degree from you. No one can ever take away my doctorate degree from me, right? So these are the things that I want folks to recognize, that when you pour into yourself and you pour into your journey and you unpack your journey, you unlearn all of the things that the world is trying to tell you is wrong about you. When you say, actually, that's what you believe, that's not what I believe about me, that's an act of political resistance, right? That for me is what makes what I do so, it's so invigorating, because I think at the end of the day, right, there's this element of I own my story, I own who I am, I own every part of who I am. And by me doing that, I'm telling other Black queer people that they can do the same thing.
Yes.
It's a trickle down effect that I think has genuinely been one of the best parts of doing what I do in my work. So, yeah.
No, I love the way that you framed it, right? It's a political action. It's an act of resistance. And I'll go as far as to say, as a Black person with all of the intersections of your identity that might come along with it, simply standing up and saying that you love yourself is an act of resistance, is a revolutionary act. And I love that you brought up James Baldwin. I was just listening to a speech, and I'll never be able to say it as eloquently as him, but he was trying to get people in the audience to understand that me waking up and proclaiming that I am proud to be a Black human being in this society goes against absolutely everything that the overarching power structure has built for the last amount of eons, right? So I just really appreciate you framing it that way, because when we talk about resistance, when we talk about being revolutionary, right, even loving yourself in the context of the society that we lived in is a revolutionary act. And I hope that, for those that are listening, I hope that framing it that way inspires you to take that extra step into coming to grips with your identity, seeing where your identities intersect, and being proud of who you are and representing. So thank you for framing it that way. I think that was really perfect of you to say that. So just to wrap up our interview, our last question, my favorite question, I like to call it, my Black optimism question. Just keeping in the spirit of, being able to look to the future, and if not in our lifetime, maybe the next generation's lifetime. What is something that you can say that you are just super optimistic about when it comes to future generations of Black scholars?
Yeah, that they have. So what I'm really optimistic about is knowing that there is so much more ways to access information and people and connections in ways that I didn't have when I was in school. While I was in school, yes, MySpace was a thing, but the way that information spread then to the way the information spreads now is so different. And it's so cool to know that, so like I think about what's happening over at, I think it was Rutgers. There was some stuff going down with the Black students there, how that information spread it to schools on the East Coast, and how students are saying, oh, we're not going to do this, or we stand with this school, or we stand with these Black students on campus there. Like all of like how fast that information moves, and how students are working together in a network, right? Especially like right now that we're in quarantine, how we're all kind of working together to get information out about the ways that anti-racism or, racist issues or whatever the case may be is moving throughout the country. That for me just makes me feel so good to know that there's so many youth, specifically younger Black individuals, Black queer individuals who are standing in front of the movement that are saying, we are the ones that are going to change things. We are the ones that are going to take down these systems. We are the ones that are going to make sure that this buck stops here. And I love that. I think that that's what really makes me so optimistic, is to see that these youth, and the allies and the accomplices who are working with them. That for me is also what makes me so happy, to know that there are folks out in the world who are really supporting the voices of Black youth and Black young educators. The one thing that I want to make sure that I highlight, and I think is important to note, I always say this, and I always just want folks to note it, that there are going to be a lot of people in this world who teach you things and tell you this is what you need to know, but then get mad that you're actually utilizing the stuff that you're learning. Keep doing that. That for me is what makes me so happy about this world, that there are actively Black kids, queer kids, Black queer kids who are learning this stuff, thinking about it, digesting it, flipping it, rewriting about it, utilizing different, aspects of Malcolm X's speeches, all of these things to ultimately help take down the patriarchy, white supremacy, all these different things that impact us. And so that for me just makes my heart smile. Like it makes me happy to know that in 10 to 15 years, the youth that I've worked with or that I've spoken with will be the ones doing the work that I'm doing, and that hopefully that the world will look a little bit better.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you so much for that. That's what we're talking about, folks. For those of you that are listening, right? This is how you create impact. This is how you create change. And this is how you can use your lived experiences to not only help process the things that you might have experienced, the traumas that you might have experienced, but ultimately, how can you be a better individual for the next person behind you who's going to go through all of those same exact experiences, if not more, right? How can you put them in a position of power to be exactly who it is that they need to be and deserve to be in this world? Dr. Higgins, thank you so much for sharing all of that inspiration with us, sharing your story with us. We were super happy to amplify your voice on Blue, Gold, and Black. And once again, I definitely want to give another shout out to Toy and the LGBTQ Resource Center at UCR. Super instrumental in putting Dr. Higgins and I together to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Higgins.
Thank you. And take care.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Catch y'all later. Thank you for joining us on Blue, Gold, and Black. This program is produced by the Community Engagement and Outreach Unit of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California, Riverside. Learn more about attending UCR by visiting admissions.ucr.edu, and be sure to check out the description for other useful links and resources. Help support this podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing. And be sure to check out our podcast videos on YouTube. Catch you guys later.